Welcome to the 11 a.m. session. This is actually a repeat session from yesterday. It's called Digging into Security, Compliance, and Reporting. You have the honor and pleasure of having a presentation by Katie English. Katie is a manager of professional services here at Jamf. I've been working with her for the last couple of years, and she is fantastic. And so if you would, please, in just a second, give a round of applause for her. But before I turn it over, just a reminder from yesterday, we're doing our Q&A via Twitter, and the hashtag is up here at the front. So thank you, Katie. Hashtag JNUC 2016 dig. So if you have any questions, please put them on there. I'll be monitoring it throughout the presentation. I'll be back up at the end to go ahead and ask those questions to Katie. So without further ado, here's Katie.
Thank you, and thank you for joining me again. If this is your repeat performance, you'll notice I am not joined by my teammate Erin today. She's actually on an airplane to a customer location. So I'm Katie, and we're going to be talking about security, compliance reporting, the stuff that actually exists already in the JSS. So the JSS, listen to me, Jamf Pro. The actual stuff that actually exists in the framework, the bits that are there today that you can use as a brand new administrator coming into the environment. And then, a year later when your boss says, here's a PDF of security compliance stuff that we have to accomplish, we also have some stuff that doesn't already exist in the toolbox that you can add in later on. So that'll include some remediation, and then of course I'm happy to take some questions at the end. So, what already exists? What's in there today? We've got, of course, software updates. And so software updates, it's actually not just I update or I don't update. You heard Fletcher Previn talk a little bit about how comparatively easy it is to get Apple devices updated with MDM. And so the way this works is in our inventory collection, the first step, and it's hard to see, but that is actually highlighted right there. The first step is to actually enable inventory collection for software updates. And so basically this runs the software update -L command on your computer and returns software updates that are available specifically for your model of computer, for your current patch level, and also against the configured software update server for that client. So when we gather that information, we can actually see that in our inventory records. And it looks a little bit like this. And so this computer is a little bit blurry, but we can see that it's got a few updates available, including the 10.11.6 update. So it actually iterates. It'll show you exactly which updates are available. It'll also count that for you and tell you that there are 3 updates available for a given computer. So you can actually get very general information. Hey, updates are available. And then if you actually dig into the inventory record, you can see which specific updates. Maybe I'm not terribly worried about iTunes, but I am really worried about that security update that came out last week. And here's some quick smart grouping. You can see the logic here is that number of available updates is more than, and it's an integer value, which means we can do math on it. We can say more than 0, immediate software grouping or smart group collection there to say anybody who falls into that group we need to think about. For iOS, we have some logic as well. You can also do greater than or equal to here as an operator. For the latest version that you're concerned about, 10.02 being the most current version of iOS available. And we also have in 9.9.6, it might have been in 9.9.3 as well, the MDM commands to actually issue MDM updates to both macOS and iOS clients, assuming that they are up to the latest versions, then can actually receive those commands. And this is available in the JSS. We can also set a software update server for a given client. So we can say, again, that's really blurry, and I apologize for that. But we can actually say, what is the host name of my internal software update server? So from the management perspective, you can actually host your internal updates, curate them and say, I only want these updates available to my clients. You can actually specify branches and say, here's the production branch, here's a pre-prod branch. I'm testing those over here in pre-prod before I actually make them live in production. And then by way of network segment, we can say, if I'm on the network, if I'm connected, maybe even in a specific building, I talk to the local resource, my local software update server, and that's specified down here. In a policy action, it's actually super easy. Once you've defined your network segment and your associated software update server, then you, in your policy, can just say, talk to your default. Because you're in that network segment, you're going to talk to the local resource. Don't have to get any fancier than that. And we can target just the computers in our smart group that says, I have software updates greater than 0, therefore I'm going to update on some periodic basis. And so I've seen customers use this in different ways in terms of maybe they'd make an equivalent of a patch Tuesday. And so some specified day comes around once a month and we're just going to mass update Macs. Or maybe we say, we're going to have this happen once every Tuesday morning. And then that allows us to actually recover from any particular updates that might be problematic during the course of the week. I've also seen people say, I'm going to let it happen Friday afternoon and deal with the aftermath on Monday. So it kind of depends on your own policies. It depends on your own kind of corporate culture. But we can kind of match anything that you're already doing on the Windows end very easily with policy actions. And again, we have our scoped limited to a network segment, only happen while you're on the HQ network. This is also a mass action. We can do the download OS version and install as an MDM command for macOS. Now on the iOS end, we can tell because we have our happy mobile devices selected at the top, we have the MDM mass action to also apply software updates as available. And you'll notice actually this tells us DEP devices only. That's the only way we can apply mass actions this way. Of course, one of the hot topics this week is patch reporting, and there's plenty to say about that. I'm just going to cruise through it very, very quickly. And the example that we have here is primarily Chrome is the one we're talking about, mostly because there's a good chance it's going to be out of date before I'm done talking today. We currently are reporting against 34 common titles. And they're the ones you could probably guess, the ones you know about, the Adobes, the Chromes, the Office patches. And so we can set up patch reporting, new option here as of 9.9.3 in JNUC Pro. We set up Google Chrome. We can also set up notifications. Of course, this functionality is evolving. And you saw a lot of good stuff from Dean's presentation yesterday. We can see a nice pie chart telling us just how out of compliance we are, and add that to our dashboard so that when I first log in to the server, I can see exactly how out of compliance I am. And we can use these as smart criteria policy or smart group criteria to be a policy action. There's an interesting bit of logic here. It's tempting to change the operator to less than the latest, right? But then with something like Chrome, which again, gonna be out of date any second now, you can actually get yourself into a kind of a policy loop where you haven't yet packaged the latest version of Chrome to deploy, but yet you're targeting the versions that are out of date according to the patch that's known to the JSS. And so you might be constantly reapplying an out of date version of Chrome. Everybody's still in the smart group to say, yeah, but I don't have the latest. But we don't have the latest available yet. So that's why the logic won't let you in a smart group say, for example, for a targeting policy, to say, get everybody to the latest version. Of course, we can do by way of MDM commands for iOS. And macOS, we can actually update App Store apps. Maybe a little less impactful on the Mac side than on iOS, but now, of course, we can do mass actions to update per app, and also kind of, on the whole, just say, update everything all at once. We want to be careful with that one, though, especially at huge volume, which we do see. Encryption, one of those kind of a buzzword item. Fletcher mentioned it today. Even encryption is a thing that we have to do. And we're talking about FileVault 2, which is actually FileVault now. but we're not talking about FileVault 1 ever. So I'm just going to say FileVault 2 status reporting. This is super easy, built into Jamf Pro to say, show me everybody who is not encrypted. Show me everybody who's eligible to be encrypted. Show me everybody with a boot drive that is not yet encrypted. And then get a smart group for that and take action on that. Individual key validation. So of course we have options about what kind of encryption key we're going to use in our clients, individual or institutional key. We can validate that individual key. And there's actually an interesting little note here about uptime. Periodically, we will actually see computers that have been up for some extended amount of time falsely report that they do not have a valid individual key. And so we can actually kind of group that together and say, by way of an extension attribute that's available on Jamf Nation, how long have you been up? That's quite a while. So if you start falling into the group of invalid or unknown key validation, then maybe I need to actually just restart you, and then everything works again. So that's actually an added feature there. You can do FileVault 2 in a couple different ways. Of course, you can manually apply it. You can actually have a configuration profile that redirects the individual key to your management address. That works. You can also enforce it by way of configuration profile. You can enforce it by way of policy. You can give people options to defer for some amount of time. And this is very organizationally specific, which is a very nice kind of thematic intro into the second part of the presentation. You guys, as admins, you know best how your users need to use their computers. If it's just going to be easier to rip off the Band-Aid and say, you got to restart it now to get encryption done, cool. If you want to give people the option to wait a little while, that's all right too. But we can kind of handle it the way that it actually makes the most sense for you guys. And this is just a quick look at what the policy looks like. Oh, excuse me, configuration profile. And you can actually see we are, in this case, using an institutional recovery key and creating the individual just at once by way of the MDM settings distribution. Alternately, by policy, we have the option here. It says next logout as the triggering event. I don't know anybody who actually ever logs out of their Mac, and so I am inclined to think about login instead, or even just kind of kick the computer out and say, you know what, we're restarting now, and at next login, we're going to do the FileVault encryption. With the various capabilities in the JSS, Jamf Pro, we can we can enable additional users. Disable users as FileVault enabled users. We can add the management account as a FileVault enabled user. And we can also reissue new keys. We can prompt the client to issue a new individual key if that's appropriate. We have a lot of management capability here. On the iOS side, of course, we can report on data protection and jailbreak status on our clients. I do want to point out, it's not delineated on the slide here, but jailbreak detection does require the self-service mobile app be installed on the device, and that allows us to do that jailbreak detection and reporting. And that is the native tool set, the stuff that comes in the box that's handed to you when you install the Jamf server. But the thing is that that's not the complete picture. And so I asked yesterday, and I'm just curious again today, how many people have heard of the Center for Internet Security? Yeah. How many people got some PDF of a bunch of benchmarks this year that said, hey, we have to do this now? Got a few people that happened. Okay. So we have to think about how do we build tools that aren't yet in the box? So what can we add to our toolbox to actually kind of improve our security compliance and reporting? The challenge here is that every organizational box looks a little different. Everybody has different requirements, different things that have to happen. And so having this one size fits nobody in particular is not super helpful. And so when we're thinking about these third-party recommendations, the top one on the list is the CIS, the Center for Internet Security, but there are plenty of other organizations out there that have things to say about security and compliance. A couple of them listed there, NIST and ISO. Those come up from time to time, and then occasionally you're going to see just random recommendations from some internal security org, some guy who works at the institution across the street. He came up with a spreadsheet, and now your boss says you have to do this stuff. This happens. The thing is, you guys, as the admin, you win. So third party says, you have to do this to be compliant. Admin has to figure out how to make that happen. More than that, you have to weigh your organizational priorities against this third-party authority that says, this is how it should be. Okay, but maybe not. Maybe we have to actually make some careful decisions about how we apply these compliance metrics in our environment. I do want to point out, I'm going to leave this slide up a moment because I know people are going to want to take pictures of it. There are a lot of great resources out there already. I literally just did a search for GitHub CIS Mac and came up with a few immediately. So go ahead and take pictures. I'm going to give you another URL here in a second. Next slide. Anytime now. There we go. Here's a new one. This is for my team. And so you can actually go out here, all of the stuff that I'm about to talk about as far as tools to add to your management toolbox, they're out here at Jamf Professional Services. But to the point of the previous slide, this is not a super original idea. A lot of people have been doing these kinds of tasks for a while now and have been trying to kind of add to this knowledge base. And so I very gratefully use them as my example here. I have some guiding principles about how we work with this. And this is sort of kind of how I approach device management forever, in all ways. I only want to manage the stuff that I have to. I'm not interested in over-managing a user environment. I'm not interested in saying your dock has to be at the bottom of the screen. It has to be this big. It has to have these 4 icons. That's not really, I have better things to do than that. So I only want to manage the bare minimum. I really want to discover what's at risk in my environment. That audit piece is absolutely crucial to how this all works. We can't kind of avoid that and just say, here's the easy button and I'm compliant and done. No, we really actually need to kind of study this and learn a bit more about what's going on in the client base. And also we want to apply it thoughtfully. Not everything is kind of a one-size solution. We are going to bump into areas where, and I've had customers say this to me, if I disable this thing, my developers are going to riot. Or if I just start imposing settings and I turn on file name extensions in the Finder, that's going to go badly for me. People don't want these sort of settings to be flipped without their knowledge, without their input. Some of these things are pretty cosmetic. So we want to be careful about how we apply it, and that's partly what informs the tool set that's available here. So this tool, again, all available out on GitHub, all available for use, reuse, editing, improvement. I was in the shower this morning and thought, oh, there's a thing I need to add to that. So it's going to get better over time. But it allows us to do this in a 3-step process. The first step is to choose your organizational priorities. And so we're going to see what that looks like. But basically, there are a lot of categories, and we're going to decide, I care about this category. Organizationally, this is a priority for us. Or, yeah, maybe not so much. And so we can actually set that and have our clients inform us of their current state. That's step 2. We gather recon to say, this is what our clients look like today. And then we can remediate based on what we discover in step 2 and say, you know what, we've discovered quite a bit of risk in these areas. So we're going to go ahead and apply our remediation plan. You thought the screen was blurry before? There's a lot of stuff going on here. The good thing about the benchmarks that these organizations provide is that they're extremely granular and in often cases very binary. Let's look at a particular property list, a particular key, and let's see if it's set to true or false. And true is compliant, false might not be compliant. That's great. It's very easy to say I'm compliant in these 3 ways, I am non-compliant in these 20 ways, whatever that might be. As you might imagine, translating this into a management solution is a big mess. And I've seen this happen, and have unfortunately contributed to it in early iterations of this kind of project, where you start adding in extension attributes. Let's measure the value of that property list. Let's get that key back into our management server. Let's smart group against it. And then let's build a tiny little policy that fixes it. Dozens of artifacts just spewed all over your server, trying to accomplish the task of compliance. But it's all just messy. And if you're not super careful with your naming conventions, then they're everywhere. And frankly, I think we can make this a lot cleaner. So the tool set out on GitHub streamlines this significantly. 3 scripts, 2 extension attributes, and if you're feeling really frisky, then you can make a smart group out of it. So the first step is a script by policy. And this is where we have to be thoughtful. We have to start thinking about, okay, I actually really do need to decide, do we need the Bluetooth menu bar item at the top of every screen or not? So you start going through these items, and they're delineated, and they match the section numbering of the CIS benchmarks, specifically for El Capitan. We default to true because we're looking for that easy button as much as possible. So we default to yes. Organizationally, this scored item in the benchmark is also a scored item for my organization. There's one exception to that, one main exception, which is software updates. That one defaults to false, mostly because of all of the customers that I've worked with who have a need to curate internal software updates, but it's easy enough to change. I'm going to show you what that looks like in a minute. There are some notable exceptions to this workflow. There are some bits that we don't include. Password policies. So you can use PW policy, the binary on a Mac, to say your password must be of certain complexity, it expires after a certain amount of time. In many, many enterprise cases, people are already bound to AD, or they're using a tool like Enterprise Connect, and they're getting their password policies from Active Directory. So that's redundant, and I just ignored it. There's probably a better way to handle that. That's what I was thinking about in the shower this morning. And I'm going to build in some logic to actually test and see. If we're a bound computer, we're going to note in our audit log that we're probably getting our policies from elsewhere. The items that we talked about earlier in the presentation, FileVault, software updates, some of those are just exempted from this workflow. It's already in the toolbox. Redundantly, I don't want to have to deal with that over again. Same with those built-in features. So this is actually an excerpt from the code that is out on GitHub. And this is the part that requires the admin intervention, your actual brain power, where you scroll through these and you're like, yeah, these are priorities that I care about. Now I want to point out this 1.1, this is the one exception. This is the false setting by default. And if I wanted to change that to true, literally I would just take, oops, my bad on that, back up one. Come on now, here we go. I would uncomment, well, I'll just move ahead there. I would uncomment the thing that says it's false, and I would change it to true instead. This is example 1.2. This one defaults to true, but if I didn't want to enable auto update, I would just change that right here, just put the hashtag there and unhashtag it there, false, then we ignore it. This is the extent of the admin interaction for the rest of the workflow. This is where you make your decisions. The scripting does the rest of the heavy lifting for you. So hopefully this streamlines things pretty significantly. What happens is this gets written out to a plist in a known location on the client. This is the default location. Of course, you can change it to anything you like. But this plist is then read later by steps 2 and 3. So we actually will retrieve those values, those true-false values. Item 1.1, yeah, we want to work on that one. Item 1.2, not so much, so we're going to skip that one. So that gets saved out to the computer. Now this allows you to change it later. If your priorities change because organizations grow and things get different over time, all you have to do is recreate this plist by policy and say, actually, we want to change these particular settings, and so we're going to go ahead and do that. Step 2 is the heavy lifting. You can tell by the number of bullet points. So step 2 is actually going to read through that property list that we created in step 1 and says, oh, item 1.1 is true, item 1.2 is not, whatever. And then it will actually query with the scripting mechanism built in. There's no secret sauce here. It's just a lot of defaults reads. It's a lot of parsing preference files. It's a lot of reading values back, Booleans, integers, that kind of stuff. Does it meet the compliance metric according to this standard? Once it determines the compliance based on those individual items, it will actually list the risks back out to an audit file, which can be read by an extension attribute, also provided out of GitHub. And it'll count the risks too. It'll actually count them out. And just like our software update logic for smart grouping, we can say anybody who has more than one risk falls into the smart group to say, I need to think about remediation. And again, we're only limiting this to organizational risks. We're not even going to query it if it's not something you care about. So we're just going to skip that. And it kind of provides a baseline score. Who's at risk? Well, the short answer is pretty much everybody. So the workflow looks like this. The example here is for item 1.5. It actually looks at the plist item to see, is 1.5 true? If yes, then I'm just going to move on and actually do something about that. If not, cool. If it fails, I'm actually going to perform the queried action, and if it's not compliant, then I'm actually just going to skip, or I'm going to log that and move on to the next test. So as the example here, it looks in a particular property list, looks at a particular key, and it comes back to say basically 1 or 0. In this case, it's a binary action. It's either enabled or it's not. And it ends up logging failed items to that audit log, which again is in a standard location that we can read by extension attribute in our inventory record. And then it'll also count the items very helpfully. We had 3 items. Step 3 uses the exact same logic, but this case we're actually going to do something about it. So it's going to query and say, hey, property list, is this an item that we need to remediate? Yes, okay. And then it's going to check and see what's the current state. And then it's going to make a correction if that's appropriate to say, actually that particular value should be true, or that it should be an integer, or this log file should be retained for longer, and it'll actually take action to apply that. This is all pretty familiar. It's going to actually look at the plist on the client, see if this is a priority that we have set as admins. In this case, it's actually going to count the number of menu bar items for Bluetooth that you have, and if that's 0, but you say it should be 1, then it's going to add the Bluetooth menu item. In an early iteration of this workflow, people were getting Bluetooth after Bluetooth after Bluetooth. We fixed that. So just 1, not 6. So there's some caveats to this whole workflow. This is not perfect. It's not a completed product. And it's going to be out of date almost as quickly as Chrome updates, right? These benchmarks, they age. They change over time. Priorities change from organizations. The compliance tools that are out on GitHub, that's for El Capitan. I haven't written one for Sierra yet. I don't know how different it's going to be. But the published benchmarks, they come out a little bit late, sometimes very late. I think the latest NIST ones are still for Mavericks. And the other thing is compliance wanders over time. If your end users have admin rights, they can change anything that you might change back. Some of these settings are user-specific versus computer-specific, and so if I log into your computer as myself, I might not be as compliant as your user profile was because certain settings have wandered off at that point. The script provided works, but again, there's no secret sauce going on here. It's just a bunch of bash scripts, almost human readable, so you can kind of scroll through it and see what the individual chunks of code are doing. And I invite you to do that. This is not a one and done process. This involves quite a bit of thought kind of up front and then check in over time. But please take a look at the code and see what it's actually accomplishing on the computer. And then keep in mind that you can accomplish this by any number of means. This is one tool set. I showed you a slide with a bunch of other people who have put a bunch of other brain power into doing this in different ways. This is a streamlined workflow to hopefully accomplish the whole security thing, and it's going to grow over time. But there are plenty of ways to accomplish the same thing, kind of as with anything in Mac management. So with that, I'm going to leave it to Randon to read some questions from Twitter.
Do you want to maybe turn me on? That's okay. Do you want to give a round of applause first?
Thank you.
Perfect. The first question I had, Katie, was around software update server. And can you specify a unique software update server per client or smart group on the same network segment?
So, okay. Within the management server, you can set a pretty granular IP range to say these particular IPs should talk to this particular software update server. But if you need to get more granular than that, then you should think about smart groups around the specific IP range or specific IP addresses, if that's a testing methodology you need to do, and use that as a smart group or a target. And you can also use, you don't have to rely on the setting in the server to actually apply your software update server. You can actually do a defaults write command to say, this very particular client should talk to this very particular server. So you can get as granular as you want.
Perfect. Once again, if you have any questions, hashtag JNUC 2016 dig there. The other one that I got was, are extension attributes vetted by Jamf, or will they be vetted by Jamf?
So the ones that are uploaded to Jamf Nation, those have undergone some amount of vetting as far as to say it actually does what's on the tin. The ones provided on GitHub, I can tell you that they work, but you're probably going to want to look at them a bit more closely. Extension attributes, they're scripts, they run as root on your Mac, and you're going to want to be careful about how you apply them. So yeah, the ones out on Jamf Nation, by the way, some of those are a little older too. So you're going to want to make sure that they are up to date for your needs.
Another one just came in. Is it possible to set up a single software update server and then use caching servers?
Sure. So caching servers and software update servers, they accomplish different things. Caching servers are really about optimizing network utilization to say, here's an Apple client, be it macOS or iOS, it's making a request from Apple. Apple's also going to stream a copy of that software, whatever it is, update, app, whatever, to your caching server so that the next client making that same request goes to the local resource instead of out to Apple. So it's all about optimizing your network traffic. Software update server is more about controlling the updates that are available, and that's specifically Mac OS updates just for your managed Macs.
The policy or script method for remediation can be reversed by a user. Would you recommend configuration profiles instead?
I mean, you can do that, literally any way you want. Like I said, all roads lead to Rome. The thing about configuration profiles is they are kind of blunt instruments. They are not changeable by the end user. That's very true. If your user has admin rights, they can still get around that in some way. And the other thing is that, and I didn't make it clear during the presentation, but this is kind of a moving target. Things change and evolve over time. You're probably going to want to run that audit multiple times, even have it just as a regular policy, a thing that measures the current level of compliance at any given time. So I would consider this kind of a process, not just a one and done.
So somewhat related to that, any advantages that you have around enabling FileVault via configuration profiles over policies or vice versa?
Again, it's going to depend on the behavior that your end user is going to see and what your preferences are. The advantage to a configuration profile is that you kind of can't avoid it. It's going to happen. The advantage to a policy is that it's a bit more flexible. And there's no good or bad there. It's honestly just the user experience that you prefer.
Any recommendations about communicating to InfoSec and management that try to apply Windows third-party solutions to a Mac?
Gosh. Yes, and I would love to hear more about what the specific requirements are. So whoever asked that, if you want to chat afterwards, that's great.
For the CIS standards tool, some of the standards are configurable. Does the tool include those configurable settings?
The short answer is yes. The longer answer is the benchmark actually contains what they call scored and not scored items. The tool is specifically focused on the scored items, the things that actually give you an end output to say you are compliant, or however they rank that. And in those cases, the scored items are pretty much kind of binary, but also they have a threshold of compliance. So if your screensaver is set to go at 10 minutes, but the maximum is 20, there's actually a threshold there to say as long as you're less than 20 minutes, you're compliant. So there's some flexibility there.
Are there plans to have Jamf Pro escrow admin passwords set by enrollment like FileVault keys are?
I've seen that feature request. I don't know that that's on the roadmap today, but it's a really valuable suggestion. So go ahead and upvote that on Jamf Nation.
One comment, reiterating the fact of don't fear the audit. We become blinded by the day-to-day grind. So comment on that. And then looks like I got another one. What if any additional metrics will be implemented to provide greater visibility into the state of device security?
Well, I mean, the tool can do pretty much anything. So if there are suggestions, by all means, feel free to post comments on GitHub. As far as built into the Jamf Pro product, I don't know. I think we're kind of we're seeking feedback as to what would be super valuable there. So we listen to feature requests.
And final one, Katie, are you going to make your slides available?
Yes. That was easy.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone. Have a great lunch.
Thank you.